Spiritual leaders and scientists and brothers and sisters. Of course, spiritual leaders and scientists also brothers, sisters. I always emphasize, we need a sense of oneness of 7 billion human beings. Actually, 7 billion human beings are brothers and sisters. So, now here, I'm extremely happy because having this meeting take in Japan. Since many years, of course, you see, also the Mind Life Institution, which is started now nearly 30 years. Since many years, I'm quite keen. So this meeting, this kind of meeting, should take place and on Asian countries where Buddha Dharma is their own traditional religion. And frankly speaking, when our meeting takes place in the West, mainly Judeo-Christian background, and anyway non-Buddhist country. So although I never try to propagate Buddha Dharma, when I give talk about Buddhism, I always make it clear. The Westerners, you have your own traditional value, traditional faith. It is very, very important to keep your own traditional faith. To change new faith is not easy, difficult. So I always emphasize that. Therefore, you see, some sort of discussion about mind and modern science. Then much information about mind is actually come from ancient Indian psychology, Indian science of mind. Then my own knowledge also, you see, come from Buddhist sort of psychology, like that. So sometimes I feel, it might be sort of some kind of showing richness of Buddhist sort of knowledge about mind or these things. Actually, right from the beginning, I told this our organization at that time. Sometimes they call dialogue between Buddhism and science. And I told this is wrong. We are not also the discussion about Buddhism and science. No. For example, last now several decades, we never discuss about next life or salvation, moksha, or emptiness. That's Buddhist business. We only, you see, discuss about mind, about the sort of matters. So, therefore, I suggested we should say Buddhist science and modern science. And okay. So every religion, there's a philosophical part, religious part, in my mind, religious part, philosophical part. And then also, you see, we should know, I think, cultural part. Any religion, the cultural part very much sort of related with existing way of life and the cultural heritage on the area, particular area. I think one example, during Jainism and Buddhism started in India, around that period, some Hindu practitioner, you see, in the name of worship to God, thousands animals killed. So because of that kind of sort of circumstances, Jainism special emphasis about non-violence, and Buddhism as well. And the other hand, and then also like in Middle East, Islam or Judaism, particularly Islam, which started. The circumstances, I think more or less, nomad life. So a lot of crimes. So the Quran mentioned the Sharias, these things, because of, you see, the reality, the cultural aspect, the society, a lot of sort of crimes, these things. So it mentioned, I think. This is my view. Maybe wrong. So you see, cultural aspect, one way, one thing. Philosophical aspect, one thing. Then religion, one thing. So as far as religion is concerned, all major world religious tradition, same, I feel. Practice of love, compassion, as a sort of, because of the fence, right?
As a sort of a protection, a defense.
Protection of practice of love and compassion, the concept, the practice of tolerance, concept of forgiveness is some kind of a protector of practice of love and compassion. Then brotherhood, sisterhood. And then also, you see, the one sort of opposition or hindrance of sense of concern of others' well-being is selfish, greedy. Therefore, all major religious tradition teach us the practice of contentment and self-discipline. All major religious tradition talk same. Now, in order to bring conviction about these practice, the philosophical part come. So most of religions or world religion, the theistic religion, is a concept of God, creator. That concept is actually boosting the practice of love, compassion, and respect to others. All are created by God or Allah. Then cultural aspect, as I've already mentioned. So it is now here. You see, so now here, Buddhist country. I think the reason why the Indians' ancient psychology is so sort of the detailed explanation about mind and emotion is there is practice of shamatha, practice of vipassana. So both practice is a work for mind. So in order to practice these things, firstly you should know about mind, how it works, how it sort of tackles our mind. Firstly, you see, single-pointed mind. In order to practice our single-pointed mind, our mind always
distracted.
So we need certain method to bring our mind on the main sort of object. So mindfulness, these things will happen. And then further deeper, what is reality? What is the very nature of mind? All these things is mentioned. Then particularly Buddhism. I think Buddhism, firstly, no concept of creator. absolute, permanent creator. No, Buddhists do not accept, and also do not accept Atma, independent self, absolute, permanent, independent. So the gyusu drose yu de kasa choti takpar jungi ji wo meba gyusu drogen de takji rong meba.
So what is unique about the Buddhist approach is that the object of reverence is not someone, which is a sort of an absolute being, nor the individual who is, paying the reverence and homage is someone that possesses this kind of independent principle called self or Atman.
So everything interrelated, interconnected. That Buddhists call Paticcasamuppada.
Dependent origination.
So,
dependent origination.
So therefore, in order to know one thing, you have to look more wider perspective. So therefore, you see, naturally, when we deal with mind, tolerance, or forgiveness, or practice of compassion, we have to know about the whole system of mind, emotion. Therefore, you see, in Buddhist literature, a lot of explanation about this mind, these things. So therefore, however, our real meeting is the Buddhist science about mind and modern science knowledge about matters. Now, last over now 30 years, as a result of our meeting, immense benefit to us, the much sort of knowledge, much useful knowledge about matters and cosmology, these things. And particularly the quantum physics is very, very helpful. So to analyze the reality, then Buddhists call absence of independent existence. So very, very helpful. And then the modern sort of scientists about mind or emotion, very detailed sort of knowledge about brain, work of the brain. Very, very helpful. Sometimes you see these knowledge is it give us some
makes us rethink some of our assumptions.
Very good. Meantime, to scientists, you see the detailed explanation about mind. So, you see, since some time back, you see, I call map of mind. Mind is not something independent, some solid thing. No. Mind is vast, sort of world, its own world. So a lot of the problem which we are facing is mental level. And the physical level sort of problem, killing, starvation, huge gap, rich to poor. All these, and hypocrisy, corruptions, all these bully, exploitation, all these ultimately related with here, not created by mission. Mission help us become work easier. Ultimate sort of mover is here. So unless we pay more attention about here, knowledge, intelligence alone sometimes create more problem. Recently I was in East India. Modern education with the help of Christian missionaries. Really, I think almost 80% or 90% educated and 80% Christian. So there's someone is my talk is someone asked me whether is a modern education is kazoda. Kanda modern education gi me kazoda zombling be tiji mandang khares disa.
One of the person asked me, what is lacking in modern education in terms of fulfilling the human aspiration for happiness?
So in my talk, I mentioned existing modern education system is not adequate about knowledge, insight. The modern education is very much oriented about material value. So, you see, the question, you see, raised is that question. Then I responded to him, most of the troublemaker, as far as education is concerned, they are really educated people. So they are really, say, expert how to manipulate, how to cheat other people, how to deceive other people. I think dull people, I think, may not do that. More honest, like animal. So therefore, existing modern education sort of system really is pay much attention about material sort of things, not adequate about mind or inner world. So now, see, in order to sort of make known others the importance of inner value, if we say, oh, Buddha said that, or God said that, those people, only those people who believe that seriously, then they may pay more attention. But non-believer, out of 7 billion, over 1 billion are non-believer. Among the believers also, not of corrupted people there. So there are, say, recently I was in Mexico, say, once a big meeting with Kasati. A Christian.
It's a theological seminary.
Oh, many archbishops there. Oh, we have very good discussions. Then, one occasion I mentioned, oh, we religious people. You see, sometimes it seems to see faith is on our dress, not here. So long the dress put there, oh, more holy person. As soon as that dress is put aside, then no longer. So one I think bishop, no, you see, he very much sort of agreement with my view. So next day, you see, he came to see me, and he very much sort of was appreciated like that. So this also, you see, clear sign, lack of full conviction from here about honest, truthful, compassion, just compassion, truthful, honest. These are become lip service. So lack of full conviction here. Now, how to bring that? These are religious people, not adequate. So we need education field to systematically educate about our deeper values. It's not only something holy or something good, but individuals themselves. Some scientists, even some religious people, deep inside, a lot of worry, a lot of stress. Perhaps, I think, if may I say so, you see, the brain specialist, you see, they know brain very detailed. But sometimes they themselves, you see, a lot of worry here, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. So therefore, now really, now time come. The material development, wonderful, still develop. We need more money, more development. And I think Japanese contribution about the global economy. Wonderful. Still we need more work and need competition, yens and dollars and euros, very important. But meantime, the material value alone, not the real solution of happy world. happy century. So now, in order to pay more attention, more awareness, importance of inner value, as I mentioned earlier, so God, these things, people may not pay much attention. Now scientists, I think in ancient time, we say, Katiyari, Kasa, lots of us, loka jikten, jikten mixer.
The Tibetan word for translators is Lotsawa. And Lotsawa literally means the eyes of the world.
So, ancient time, you see, translator refer like that. So, in that respect, today Jimba, or Asa,
eye of the world.
Now, I think the scientists also, I think, really, jikten migrisha.
Scientists are truly eyes of the world.
Oh. Among the scientists also, like religious people, sometimes you see a little bit biased one. It's understandable. But genuine scientists, their mind, very open. They never sort of put their own desire or their own wish. Just objectively look, analyze, research. That's the only way to know the reality. So sometimes religious people, perhaps including myself, a little bit biased. I try to be more objective. So this genuine scientist, I think really opener of our mind. Wonderful. So you see, already last now, I think over 1 decade, you see the people, these scientists, they carry experiment. How much sort of helpful, how much help if you train about mind. And mainly, you see this deeper knowledge about value of compassion and some short period mindfulness. You see, they actually found immense sort of effect. So therefore, I felt, since now many years, I felt, no, Kasachukti. Collaboration, scientist. And further research. How to bring the happy world, happy century. Irrespective of the believer or non-believer, entire 7 billion human beings. Happy one. Once 7 billion human beings really, through education, develop some kind of attitude, 7 billions are same human being. All have same right. All have, you see, they all deserve our love. Then, no basis of violence, including war. War, violence, entirely based on strong sense of we and they. Once we develop genuine sense of oneness of humanity, no ground, we and they. As much as you love yourself, similarly love to others. There's no basis of killing, no basis of cheating, no basis of telling lie, exploit, like that. So that's the main reason. You see, last now, nearly 30 years, you see, I dialogue. At the beginning, about 40 years ago, one occasion, I expressed my desire, more dialogue with modern scientists. I mentioned one American lady who who follow Buddhism. Then she told me, be careful. Science is killer of religion. Then I felt, as far as Buddhism is concerned, Buddha himself, you see, told us, my follower should not accept my teaching out of faith, out of devotion, but rather thorough investigation and experiment. So that's very scientific way. So that's why, like Nagarjuna and many of these sort of great Buddhists, even in some cases, you see, Buddha's own word, they reject it. Because you see, this Buddha's teaching, or the Buddha's teaching, but it goes against reasons or experiment. Therefore, we should reject. So I reflect that. So then, okay, if scientists really prove a certain concept which we believe Buddhists mentioned, but scientists prove non-existence, then we have to accept that. So number one casualty is, now I no longer believe about existence of Mount Meru. It doesn't matter. If Mount Meru, because of the
very long. So if Mount Meru, which is the center of the traditional Buddhist cosmology, were to be made of gold, then to lose that would be quite, sad.
So therefore, you see, as a Buddhist, a follower or student of Nalanda tradition, you see, investigation, experiment is the real method to know the reality. We should not rely on quotations. So therefore, I start, you see, they talk with scientists. So, really wonderful. So now, as I mentioned briefly before, this Buddhist country, Shintoism is your ancient, your native tradition. Wonderful. I do not think there's much philosophical views in Shintoism, but you see, respect nature. That's very relevant in today's world. Sometimes it's because of technology. Sometimes we develop some kind of false
attitude.
False, we can control nature, or that kind of thing. Ultimately, we are part of nature. We have to go along with nature. So therefore, respect nature, trees, any form of life, respect is very, very important, and particularly ecology issue. I think Shinto concept, as well as Native Americans sort of believe, respect nature. Wonderful. So then Buddhism is your traditional religion, particularly Nalanda tradition. So therefore, this is a very right place. And then second thing, the one object of this dialogue is simply expand our knowledge. So for modern science, I think limited area, only thing where we can measure, we can calculate. That's a physical thing. Mind, like time, we can't because of that measurement. So, in the past, I think more because of the traditional way, classical sort of scientist. Some scientists, even if you mention non-existence of separate mind or consciousness. Now that changing, little by little changing, because they are experiment. I think now I think you all, you see, knows. Oh, brain, consciousness, there are different level of consciousness, sensorial level of consciousness. These entirely related with brain. Then more subtle level, mental level consciousness. There also you see grosser level, more subtle, very, very subtle level. More subtle, more or less independent or autonomy from brain. So through training of mind, actually some change in brain. There are sort of research now they found. So therefore, there is another sort of element which actually, you see, effect of brain, like that. So therefore, you see, we simply, you see, the extension,
expand
the research, because the field of scientific research now 가서래.
Expand.
So I think that is the academic sort of level, not 가서다 상당하게 매매체.
It's not a question of ethics, good or bad. It's simply a matter of knowledge, expand of knowledge.
So among the audience, those people who only interested about academic level, then think that way. Then those people who really feel, you see, the presence of the world, a lot of good things there. At the same time, a lot of emotional problems, or moral problems, moral crisis. That also, you see, those people who have some sort of concern about that, then our meeting can be some useful. So, thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Your Holiness.
Thank you very much, Your Holiness. Now we will start session 1. The moderator is Professor Asa Zayens, the president of the Mind and Life Institute.
Thank you very much, Seiji. We're going to begin with a presentation of about 15 minutes or a little bit less by Professor Yoshiro Imeda, who comes to us from the CNRS in Paris, although he was trained and worked here also in Japan. And he's an expert in the history of Tibetan Buddhism, especially in Bhutan. But he has a slight change in title. I'm going to call his presentation Buddhism Through History and Culture. And we wanted to open in this way so that we could really feel the range of Buddhist cultures, the styles of Buddhist engagement through someone who grew up here in Japan and has been a student also of Tibetan Buddhism. So, Yoshiro, please, I turn the session over to you.
First, I have to present
Later. Later I will give you another scarf. Okay.
So,
yes?
Take it. Yes. Your Holiness, dear fellow.
Oh, you speak English?
Yes.
Oh, good, very good.
So
welcome, special welcome. I often, you see, telling the young Japanese, you see, please pay some attention about learning English. English, whether we like it or not, it is international language.
Yes.
So my poor broken English, quite useful. So, congratulations.
Thank you. Anyway, so distinguished guests, I'm extremely happy to be here participating at this interesting and stimulating symposium. In addition, I'm particularly honored to be the first speaker. At this moment, I recall clearly my first encounter with Your Holiness. It took place at Dharamsala 42 years ago, in 72. I was then a young student coming back from France to Japan. On my way back, I stopped at Delhi. Then I met late Tatsé Ken Rinpoche, Venerable Sonam Gyamtso, and I accompanied him together with late Professor Hajime Kitamura of the Toyo Bunko.
Oh, yes.
So it is how I got the first chance to call on Your Holiness. And I said to myself, I'm very lucky to have been blessed by Your Holiness at the beginning of my career as a researcher into Buddhism. Then, today is the second opportunity to be close to Your Holiness, and I said to myself again, I'm really blessed to have such a privileged occasion after my career, which ended 2 years ago in 2012. So I'm now a completely retired person and free. So I'm enjoying this
and
freedom.
also, I think, me also, now since 2011, now I completely retired from political responsibility. So to retirement first.
Yes. So anyway, sometime last year, when I got the invitation to this symposium, I was extremely happy because the theme of the symposium enormously interested me. I therefore accepted the invitation immediately and prepared the abstract of my proposed paper entitled Mind in Early Buddhism. After some time, however, I realized that it would be ridiculous for a layman like myself, without formal Buddhist education, to make such a presentation in front of Your Holiness. It would be exactly in the image of the Japanese proverb Shakkani Seppo, which literally means preaching to the Buddha. So I therefore, declining the invitation and of seeking a seat, a comfortable seat in the audience. Still, after some thought, I decided to participate as a speaker, and here I am. But as Dr. Zayas announced, I changed my topic, because that topic which I announced is really out of the place. So today, I'd like to take up another theme which interests me since long. It is a sort of comparison between Tibetan and Japanese Buddhism, the two distinct forms of Buddhism, each with respective historical and cultural background and characteristics. First, I'm going to explain my background as a Buddhist born in the post-Second World War Japan, then as a student who pursued research mainly on Tibetan Buddhism, of which Your Holiness is the most authoritative representative. Then I'd like to point out few characteristics of this particular form of Buddhism, which is quite different from that practiced in Japan. Finally, in the light of Tibetan Buddhism, which I came to know through research on one hand and acquaintance with its practitioners on the other, I point out my personal view on few salient features of Japanese Buddhism which I am familiar with from my childhood. After my presentation, I'd be most grateful and honored if Your Holiness could give some personal comments on Japanese Buddhism and my personal view. So I was born in a rather devout Buddhist family. I recollect that every morning my father sat in front of the family altar, reciting a Buddhist text for more than half an hour, while my mother offered flowers and other items to the images and ancestral tablets in the altar. As a child, I often sat at the back of my father, listening to his melodious chanting without, however, understanding the meaning. Then, arrived at the age of reason, I asked my father one morning the meaning of the text which he has been reciting years. Then, to my great surprise, my father said he doesn't understand the meaning of the text. Then, I asked the same question to the monk who used to come to my house once a month in order to recite a longer Buddhist text in front of the family altar. To my greater surprise, he neither could explain the meaning of the Chinese text that he was chanting professionally, After these two surprises, I turned to my teachers at the school. To my disappointment, none was capable of explaining satisfactorily the text. Buddhism was something incomprehensible for them. Buddhism was not in the curriculum of the school. Therefore, Buddhism is not a subject to be studied and understood, but just a tradition to be followed without questioning. This was how Buddhism was practiced and regarded in Japan in the 1960s. I presume that even now the situation is by and large the same, if not worse. So, under these circumstances, I decided to adventure alone in order to understand the meaning of the mysterious texts which people regarded so important and holy. This was the beginning of my long inquiry into Buddhism. I first studied Pali and Sanskrit, two classical languages of Buddhism. I soon discovered that the majority of Mahayana Buddhist texts written in Sanskrit have been lost, and one has to rely on their translations in Chinese and Tibetan. While Chinese translations are rather free and literary, Tibetan translations are systematic, literal to the extent of mechanical. At present, the Tibetan canon is the most exhaustive and comprehensive collection of Mahayana Buddhist texts. This is the reason why I specialized in Tibetan Buddhism or Tibetan studies. In addition to the important literary heritage, what is equally important, if not more, is the fact that Tibetan Buddhism is a living tradition despite the tragedy of 1959, which resulted in the massive destruction of Tibetan culture. That tragedy has been, in a sense, a benediction in disguise for foreign students like myself. Thanks to many highly accomplished practitioners who fled Tibet to India, Europe, and the United States of America and Japan, it became possible for the first time in the history for us to have direct contact with this spiritual tradition which have long been inaccessible. I myself am happy to have enormously benefited from this new situation. Strange as it might sound, it is not in Japan that I pursued my research. As research fellow of the French National Center for Scientific Research, CNRS, I spent long years in India among Tibetan refugees, and particularly in Bhutan, the tiny Himalayan kingdom where I worked as advisor to the National Library for over 10 years. While studying with the Tibetan and Buddhist Bhutanese teachers, majority of them monks or laymen who have once been trained as monks, what impressed me most is that they are learned, capable of clearly explaining the meaning of the Buddhist text. They were not like the Japanese monks who disappointed me in my school days. In the course of my long years of study, I understood that Tibetan Buddhism has an extremely elaborate curriculum of study which is directly inherited from India. I am thus convinced that the Tibetan Buddhism continues and further develops the scholarly tradition of authentic Buddhism. What is extremely remarkable with this spiritual tradition is that it is not a simple intellectual exercise and a matter of knowing. Monks who are trained in this tradition act on their understanding. They develop and apply the inner values such as compassion, kindness, generosity in their daily lives. They personify and embody the Buddhist values, illustrate them through personal example by showing genuine concern for others. I personally have felt this throughout my long-term acquaintance with Tibetan and Bhutanese monks. I know at the same time that the majority of lay Buddhists, Tibetan and Bhutanese alike, are not literate and do not have profound understanding of rather sophisticated teachings of the Buddha. This, however, does not matter much. They live a genuine Buddhist life, taking refuge in the Triple Gem, observing basic vows, trying to do good to others, and to accumulate merits. I feel in them a genuine humane quality nourished by this spiritual tradition. Coming back to the Japanese form of Buddhism, the situation is completely different, almost diametrically opposed to that of Tibetan Buddhism. Now, I'm going to give a few examples to illustrate my statement, which might shock some of my fellow people. First of all, with rare exceptions, Japanese monks are not celibate. The monastery or temple is in fact the residence of a monk family. As a matter of fact, the monk families constitute a privileged elite class of its own in the Japanese society. The succession of the monkhood is hereditary from father to son, which is done most often without genuine motivation. As the Japanese expression bozu marumoke literally means, the monks make a clear profit. Their profession is envied by the people as a profitable one. For their honor, however, I want to specify that it is not the case with all the monks. But this is a general opinion of the Japanese people. The monks are professional in rituals and other social duties, especially funeral services, which are almost their monopoly. They have nonetheless no profound knowledge and understanding of Buddhist teachings. They preach noble words of the Buddha or the founder of their respective school, but their words remain just dead letters. Japanese monks are far from embodying them. In other terms, they do not translate them into their daily life. As such, their words are not compelling and they do not command respect from the followers. In short, they have no spiritual aura. In Japan today, one seldom encounters monks with radiant face. Turning to the ordinary Japanese, they are above all emotional and sentimental and make little use of reason. This feature is seen even in the acceptance of Buddhism. A typical example is the expression mono no aware, which means fleeting nature or pathos of things. While poetically describing and admiring the beauty of short
can you repeat the saying, the fleeting nature of?
Nature of things, pathos.
Petals, okay. Yes, can you say that again?
Pathos?
No. Can you repeat the saying, the proverb?
Okay. Huh? The Japanese. Mono no aware.
So the English translation?
The fleeting nature. This is transient.
Yeah, transient nature of petals.
Nature of things. Yes. So.
Impermanence,
fragile thing, nature of the things. This is what the Japanese feel. But while, for example, the poetically describing and admiring the beauty of short-lived cherry blossoms, which is now exactly the season, Japanese seems to understand mujo, which means impermanence, mitakpa in Tibetan. This is the level of the Japanese understanding of this important Buddhist notion, preached by the Buddha. However, this understanding is just feelings and have nothing to do with the real, genuine understanding of the impermanence as taught by the Buddha. It is the same with the death. People never endeavor to analytically understand the death. The death is a manifestation of impermanence, the very nature of things, the natural and logical outcome of the interdependence of all elements and phenomena, which is the basic teaching of the Buddha. Instead, people just lament the death, but this only betrays their strong attachment to the deceived. The attachment to and the lamentation of the fleeting nature of things is precisely the feeling that the Buddha declared useless. In short, Japanese are emotional and not rational. Yes, I repeat. In short, this is my personal opinion, but Japanese are emotional and not rational. This feature prevents them to reach with analytical and critical discernment at the true understanding of the teachings of the Buddha, which are quite logical and rational. So, as the time is limited, I do not develop on this aspect more, and I want to end my talk by a short story told by one of my Japanese friends who is a professor of Tibetan. On the New Year Day of this year, she went to a Buddhist temple with her son and daughter and 2 Tibetan friends. According to the tradition, she made them formulate each a prayer and write it down on a wooden tablet called ema. Her son's prayer was, "May I excel in studies." That of her daughter was, May my family be in good health." While those of her 2 Tibetan friends were identical and read, "May all sentient beings swiftly attain the Buddhahood." I see here the most eloquent reflection of the difference between Japanese and Tibetan Buddhism. 2 sister forms so distinct. So here I end my presentation, and I would be most grateful if Your Holiness could comment somewhat, but I'm not inducing Your Holiness in pronouncing some unpolitical or politically incorrect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Now,
yes.
I appreciate your statement. Appears to me something like self-criticism. It's good. If someone is feel, oh, everything okay, then no further development. It is very important to realize one's own drawbacks and then make effort to change, to further develop. Now, you should not feel because of the discouraged way. I think the Tibetan population, around 6 million, generally 99% are Buddhist. But I think a majority do not know what's Buddhism. They recite, they say, like you see the Sanjala Jyosu, Chola Jyosu, Gindula Jyosu.
I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, the Sangha, and so on.
I often come across the Tibetan as well as Indian Buddhist. You see, when they chanting Buddham Shanam Gacchami, Dhammam Shanam Gacchami, Sangham Shanam Gacchami, then when I ask, what is Buddha? Most cases they say, They don't know. So, therefore, and many Chinese Buddhists also, Thai, Burma, Sri Lanka, Japan, Korea, Vietnamese. Traditionally, we are Buddhist. We simply, you see, carry our sort of Buddhist sort of prayer, these things, as a sort of culture, as a habit,
Custom.
Not much pay attention about study. So therefore, I always was telling, now we Buddhist should be 21st century Buddhist. That means in general education, in everywhere, you see, what's that?
Advanced.
Much advanced. So the knowledge about Buddhism also must advance. It is not sufficient just to carry the traditional way. So you should not feel that kind of simple way is not only Japanese, but many Tibetans also is the same way. So you should not feel discouraged. So then those actually monasteries, monks or nuns. For example, nuns in the past, at least last few centuries, no study except some
chanting,
learning some sort of the prayers and chanting without knowing the meaning. So last 40 years since we came to India, I request all nunneries now should start serious study. Now the nuns also now get Geshe degree.
The highest academic degree.
Oh. Similarly, many monasteries, traditionally, no serious study, just chanting. Rituals. So these also should pay more attention about study. So now last over 40 years, you see now most of the monasteries in India, including nunnery, now they carry some sort of study. That also inside Tibet, I often, you see, expressing, as I mentioned earlier, we should be 21st century Buddhist. We must study more. So then, those big monastic institutions, over 1,000 years, they carry serious study. And the way the study is, firstly, we memorize all the root text. Myself, as a young Dalai Lama, young monk, and ceremonial way, ceremonial time, they put me on throne. When I get teaching, my tutor classes, my tutor always kept one whip. So suppose that whip, yellow whip. So the student, Dalai Lama, so must be holy whip. I know if my teacher used the holy whip, I don't think any difference of holy pain. I don't think. I think same pain. So out of fear, you see that whip, I study. Although I have no interest. So you see, age about 6, 7, I already start memorizing these root text. Then about, I think, 10 years old, 11, then I study. Then start explanation, each word with commentary, mainly Indian masters. All these root text, all of them, mostly Indian writing. Like Nagarjuna, Arya Sangha, Maitreya Buddha, like that. Maitreya Bodhisattva, like that. So therefore, and then gradually, the proper sort of method learning is debate, dialectical debate. So always raise question. Question also, you see, try to find the contradictions. That's the proper way to dialectical study, debate.
Hello.
I think you both noticed. You see, several hours daily, and go that way 2 years. Now in India, comparatively less population of student. How still they take 20 years for study. How many years you study?
11. 11.
11. My study about 13 years. Usual sort of become to be scholar, at least 20 years. So as far as study is concerned, the Kiruk tradition, I think, very good sort of tradition. A lot of study, debate. So therefore, now not only nuns, but also lay people, also now I sort of appeal, now should study. And also, you see, useful to adopt the dialectical sort of debate. Now some lay people also now doing that. Not only in India, but also inside Tibet. So therefore, I always is telling Tibetan tradition, because the main person who introduced Buddhism in Tibet, 8th century. Although interest about Buddhism developed 7th century. I think main sort of introducer of Buddhism, Shantarakshita from Nalanda Buddhist institution. So Shantarakshita at that time, I think almost one of the top scholars, a monk, and a great logician. So therefore, since you see, he introduced Buddha Dharma according to Nalanda tradition. So the way to study, use logic. So emphasis, importance of logic.
Reasoning.
Reasoning. So that's you see, I think now in Japan, easily, you see, you can start, you can introduce some more
rigorous study.
And for that, I think the ancient Chinese translation, like the Nagarjuna's writing, already there. And many of ancient Nalanda masters' writing already available in Chinese language. And I think in Japanese language also, I think must be there. So if not sufficient, then should translate. Then some rare text or important text, for example, Chandrakirti's the commentary about Madhyamika Mulakarika, the Nagarjuna's root text. That's very, very important. Seems to see in Chinese language not translated. Now in modern time, some Chinese now translate. Now some Japanese also now trying to translate into Japanese, isn't it?
No.
So this, I think for that reason, we need more cooperation. Now recent years, although you see during 13th Dalai Lama, you see, he tried to contact with the Japanese. Some Japanese, you see, invited to Lhasa, and some Japanese, you see, joined some monastery. When I first came into India, you see some people, some Japanese I met, who spent some time in Tibet for study, like that. So now, although we are refugees, but we are free. So we can, sometime back, the you see, sometime back, you see, we discuss, you see, some Tibetan, you see, go your monastery, and from your side, some come to India for further sort of discussion about Mikyo, Tantayana. And similarly, the Buddhist, the Madhyamika philosophy, all these Yogacarya philosophy, or these, I think now time come. And also, you see, we have this sort of modern technology. So communication now become much easier. And also, you see, flight from here to India, from India come to here, also it's quite easy. Not like ancient time. So now we must take these good opportunity. So we are same. Because the follower of Buddha Shakyamuni, and particularly the follower of Nalanda, we are same. So only thing is, some area we simply neglected. This is not only Japanese case, but also you see the Tibetan, also Buddhanists. Many Buddhanists do not know what is the real Buddha.
Yes.
Like that. So the only question is pay more attention about study. And a qualified teacher. That's the matter. So that's my response.
Thank you, Your Holiness. Thank you very much. I think especially in scientific dialogues with people who have dedicated their life to study and research in the sciences regarding the natural world, this kind of care of the cultivation of the mind, the understanding of these great texts and of our inner experiences is especially important. Thank you. Thank you also, Professor Yameda. We're going to change chairs. Jimpa is going to take on a different role for a few minutes. He's going to become a presenter. So I present to you now no longer the translator of the Dalai Lama, but I present to you a doctor of philosophy and Buddhist studies, a geshe scholar trained in the Tibetan tradition, monastic university tradition, person of extraordinary insight and understanding concerning the Abhidharma texts and the nature of the mind. So Jimpa will be speaking to us concerning taking Buddhist psychology and contemplative perspectives seriously.
Okay. Holiness, as Professor Arthur Zion says, that I'll be taking a different role, so I would like to ask for your permission so that I could step outside my traditional role as your interpreter and make this short presentation. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be part of this first Mind and Life conference here in Japan, in Kyoto. And I would like to thank the Socorro Research Center and Kyoto University for really being a wonderful host for this historic event here. My presentation is going to be about really making a simple or a kind of a straightforward point that His Holiness has very eloquently made, that when it comes to understanding the nature of mind and the ways in which we can understand the workings of the mind, it's really in the interest, even of the self-interest of the scientific traditions, to take Buddhism seriously, Buddhist sources seriously. So I'll briefly explain the outline. The first, I will talk about what are the resources that exist in the Buddhist investigative traditions for this project of mapping the mind. Second, I will identify some unique features of the Buddhist explorations of mind. How does that differ from the kind of typical scientific approach? Third, I will explain how, sort of illustrate how Buddhist taxonomy of mind and mental factors are actually used in the specific context for specific purposes. And finally, I will identify some of the ways in which Buddhist understandings can contribute towards this larger scientific project of mapping the mind. So that's my outline. Now, to identify what are the key sources in the Buddhist tradition, and my own background is Indo-Tibetan tradition that His Holiness spoke about, and how Professor Imeda also underscored the point that the Tibetan tradition is really the continuation and further development of the Indian tradition, scholarly tradition, which His Holiness often refers to as the Nalanda tradition.
I think further development, that I don't know.
Continuation.
That did it. I think the Tibetan scholars, so
Tibetans have really kind of integrated knowledge of the Indian tradition and really made it much more understandable and accessible, and brought the greater detail. So I will identify from my own Indo-Tibetan tradition some of the key sources that may be used in this larger project of mapping the mind. His Holiness very persuasively reminded us that one of the reasons why in the classical Indian tradition there is so much emphasis on exploring the nature of mind is because of the prominent use of meditative practices, such as cultivating the single pointedness of mind and special insight into understanding the nature, vipassana and shamatha. And in the Buddhist tradition, particularly, this interest in mind goes back really right to the time of the Buddha himself. Those who are familiar with the Buddha's teachings collected in the book called Dhammapada. In fact, the very opening lines of Dhammapada says that our mind creates our own world. And similarly, in collection of aphorisms, Udana Varga, which exists in the Tibetan translation, there's a line where the Buddha says that the disciplined mind is a happy mind, and disciplined mind leads to happiness. So there is a recognition that really happiness and suffering, and in fact liberation and unenlightened state, these are really states of the mind. So mind really has this very important role to play. Now, in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, one of the important resources that could be used and that needs to be used is referred to as the Abhidhamma texts. Abhidhamma is a very specific set of Buddhist texts and the discipline that goes with it. I shall be speaking more about this later. And in the Tibetan tradition, we have two main Abhidhamma resources. One is Asanga, that His Holiness already mentioned, and the other one is the Vasubandhu's tradition. So I'll be focusing later more on the Abhidhamma sources. However, there is another source in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, which is the Buddhist epistemological texts. And in the Sanskrit word is pramana texts. And this is a very important, again, kind of a dimension in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. And the key figures in this development are Dignaga, the 5th century, and Dharmakirti, who was the 7th century, and then Shantarakshita, that His Holiness mentioned, who was the key figure who brought and established scholastic Buddhism in Tibet in the 8th century. Then finally there is this other sources, which is the contemplative theories and practices which are found in the Yogacara text and also in the Vajrayana traditions. Although contemplative practice is really, found in all the other resources as well, Abhidhamma, Buddhist epistemology, and so on. But in the Yogacara text, and particularly in the Vajrayana text, there's a lot more resources that more specifically focuses on the contemplative techniques. And also in the Vajrayana tradition, there is a very interesting kind of, aspect which looks at mental processes as where the role of the body is taken very seriously, which I think is particularly interesting for the scientist because it offers a kind of a behavioral avenue to look into some of the mental processes that the Buddhists have been very interested in. Now, having identified these three sources, I'll be now focusing more on Abhidhamma because Abhidhamma is, in some sense, the development, from a development point of view, the earliest kind of systematic approach. And Abhidhamma models of mind really informs all the other Buddhist traditions as well. So it's in some sense, Abhidhamma models of the mind is really a kind of a premise upon which all the subsequent Buddhist thoughts on related to mind are based upon.
Just I want to interfere here. I want to just express the epistemology.
Epistemology.
I think in Chinese translation, I heard one short text wrote by Dignac that translated available in Chinese translation in ancient time. But the rest of the text of epistemology, the Dignac, few other sort of text, and then particularly the Dharmakirti was a text. This seems to be not available translation. So in Tibet case, measures of text all translated. Therefore, in Tibetan tradition, a number of scholars, you see, pay much attention about the epistemology. So that immense help.
So that's immense help for developing a kind of a more reasoned and analytic approach to the texts.
Those tagar tabe but dash that the mare, the Benaji Tensi Guaro, Chusum Sarjadi, Kutas Shisha Temple Chajik Mato, Churkish Medua. They need D, because Chabajagi Kasuru Puggy Nuba Shush. So the Greek Japanese canon is Gugarshadi.
So the epistemological writings, if you look at them on the surface, one would not notice if there is any specific kind of direct connection with Buddhist thought in general, because they really deal with how knowledge is generated, what are the logical forms of argument, for example, the triple character of a valid argument and so on. But the significance of the epistemological tradition is that it really helps sharpen one's mind and provide methodology that one can use then to apply to many other topics. So His Holiness was saying that he wished that at some point, eventually, some of these epistemological texts could be even translated into Japanese.
Then perhaps I think my own little story. I think my age around, 15, 16, I think. No later. I think later. But anyway, when I start more seriously study about Parmana Vaddhika Karika,
Dharmakirti's text.
Dharmakirti's main text. After study that, my mind becoming more skeptical now. Skeptical. Whenever I come across something, immediately response, what is the reason? What is the reason? Very, very helpful. Even my own teachers are teaching, what is the reason? What is the reason?
So you tend to be less saying a yes, yes, sir.
So it is very, very helpful. You see, to open our mind, the thinking, so more interest about reason behind these things. That's very, very helpful in order to develop the investigation. Extremely helpful.
So, for the sake of time, I'll shorten my presentation. What I want to do is to really identify two important features of the Abhidharma approach to studying mind. One is this basic distinction between primary factor of awareness and the other facets of the mind that actively help engage with the object. And this is a distinction that is drawn in Abhidharma and maintained in all the other Buddhist traditions as well. So here I will read these two aspects, and this is from a paper that was published in Cambridge Handbook of Consciousness. According to the Abhidharma schema, which is to our knowledge unique, each mental state is analyzed as having two aspects. One is the primary factor of awareness, citta, sim, whose function is to be aware of the object, and two mental factors, or caitasika, whose function is to qualify this awareness by determining its qualitative nature as pleasant or unpleasant, focused or unfocused, calm or agitated, positive or negative, and so on. So you can see that there is right from the beginning a recognition that mind, the experience of mind may seem like a kind of a monolithic entity, but actually it's a complex phenomena. And even a single mental state can be divided into these two aspects, the primary factor of awareness and then these other factors. So to illustrate this visually, so you have the primary factor that is present in all mental episodes, and then those on the gray circle are known as the 5 omnipresent factors. So every single mental event will have these 5 factors present in that experience, no matter how conscious or unconscious it may be. But if that particular mental state or episode has a more kind of enduring quality or more sustained focus or clarity of the object, then these other factors will come in: aspiration, appreciation, mindfulness, and so on. So you can see that there is this idea that mental experience is not a simple experience. It's a very complex experience which has many different facets. So that's a very important part of the Abhidharma approach. The second one that I want to do is to really show another important part of this various factors that Abhidharma analyzes, really understood in terms of a dynamic process. They are not a static entity or things. They are, in fact, mental processes having causal and other dynamic relationship between the two. So even in the definition of each of these factors, their functions are identified, their causal relationship with other factors are also listed. So which gives you a kind of an understanding that can be applied. So here this is applied in the context of understanding how something like a craving leads to addiction. So you can take the first step is here. So you have coming into contact with an object. So for example, if someone is tasting Coca-Cola for the first time, so that's the coming into contact with the object, and that experience of tasting Coca-Cola gives rise to a feeling. So either you like it, you enjoy it, and that experience of enjoyment kind of leads to further craving. And if you really think about it, you become more fixated, leads to grasping. And then once you have a fixation, you immediately goes on to grab another one. And then this forms a habit, and which then leads to wanting to drink more. So this is the way in which you can see the causal relations that are identified in the Abhidharma mental analysis really has an application in understanding human behavior. Now, again, these are how do people, average Buddhist practitioner, make use of these mental lists? So for example, an average Buddhist practitioner, both lay or a monastic, living an ethical life is a very important part of being a Buddhist. So what are the factors that you need to cultivate and apply in your day-to-day life? So these are the factors that are identified as being key to living an ethical life. So a sense of self-respect, regard for others, ability to be aware, and mindfulness, and some ability to monitor your behavior, your action, and then having this kind of attentive, cautious stance vis-a-vis things that lead you normally to negative actions. Similarly, for the more advanced Buddhist practitioners where meditation becomes very important, what are the factors that need to be identified and cultivated and applied in one's practice? So you have attention, you can train attention, you have focus. Mindfulness is the ability to retain that attention for a long period of time. And metacognitive awareness allows you to monitor whether you have lost your attention or not. Equanimity refers here to the ability to let go so that you don't hold the mind too tight. And so this kind of having a kind of equanimity, concentration is the single-pointedness, intelligence is what allows you to bring insight, and pliancy is the mental flexibility that you need to adopt and apply. So you can see that Abhidhamma list is not simply a list just for the sake of generation of knowledge, but they have real applications in the life of a Buddhist practitioner. So I will actually conclude by, because for the sake of time, I don't think we have much time left. I will, the areas where Buddhist tradition can really contribute to this larger scientific project of mapping the mind. One area where it's very important is the Buddhist tradition has developed, like other classical Indian tradition that has meditations as part of their techniques, a very sophisticated method for using the mind to analyzing mind. So in some sense, it's the first-person introspective approach. And this is, the use of introspection is one method that the Western psychology has really struggled with. At one point it was important, but then it was rejected. And now there is a real chance through this collaboration with contemplative tradition that we can bring back introspection, but in a much more sophisticated and disciplined manner. And here I will read from His Holiness to conclude. His Holiness writes in his book on science, A Universe in a Single Atom, and I quote here, "The Buddhist understanding of mind is primarily derived from empirical observations grounded in the phenomenology of experience, which includes the contemplative techniques of meditation. Working models of mind and its various aspects and functions are generated on this basis. They are then subjected to sustained critical and philosophical analysis. So it's not just simple raw data that you get from observing. You also subject them to critical analysis and philosophical analysis and empirical testing through both meditation and mindful observation. So if you want to observe how our perceptions work, we may train our mind in attention and learn to observe the rising and falling of perceptual processes, which results in first-hand knowledge of a certain aspect of how the mind works. We may use that knowledge to reduce the effects of emotions such as anger or resentment, but my point here is that this process offers a first-person empirical method with relation to the mind." End of quote. So His Holiness is making here a very powerful point that there is a real chance that through this kind of collaboration, some version of kind of more sophisticated version of introspection can be brought into the study of mind. And another area where the contribution would be helpful, and Richie will be speaking more about this, and I haven't spoken more specifically about the list of Abhidhamma taxonomy because I know Venerable Dr. Barry Curzon is going to be talking more about that list. Richie's work has testified and demonstrated how collaboration between Buddhists, contemplative scholars and neuroscience scientists can really lead to a better understanding of how mental training like meditation really works, and Richie will be speaking more about that. Another area where I would personally urge the scientists to take Buddhist sources seriously is to really look at the construct themselves. For example, now there is a lot of research taking place in mindfulness, attention, compassion, empathy, and so on, and many of these terms are fairly new for the contemporary neuroscience and other psychological sciences, but these are concepts that have been looked at for a long, long time in the classical Indian tradition. And so by engaging with these contemplative perspectives, the scientists who are involved in scientific study of mind can look at their own constructs much more critically and to see whether the construct is complete or whether they need to further break it down into its components. And this is one area where I think engagement with the Buddhist resources can really make a powerful contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimpa.
똑똑함이 직세. 아니 무슨 두배 주고. 다도 세ven 주고 직세 딜러민듯이.
So His Holiness was reminding me that one of the important insights in the Buddhist tradition, particularly in the epistemological tradition, is the distinction that is drawn between conceptual versus non-conceptual processes. So, for example, like direct perception, like visual experience, and so on, are not mediated by concepts, not kind of linguistic concepts. But on the other hand, thoughts, memories, and so on, many of them are very heavily dependent upon language-based concepts. So there is a clear distinction between conceptual processes versus non-conceptual processes in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. And similarly, there is also an understanding how the non-conceptual, like perceptual processes, engage with objects in a sense more directly. In a sense, unmediated. There's some kind of mediation, but not mediated by language and thought, whereas thought engages with objects through the mediation of some kind of elimination process and selection process. So again, it's these kind of issues. So, for example, like when you apply concepts to objects, the concepts have a kind of exclusionary kind of a role where in order to identify something as something, you implicitly need to be able to draw the boundaries of the application of that term. So these are, again, important resources. So we know. So, for example, between the conceptual versus non-conceptual, the conceptual mind tends to be very swift and also kind of alert, and that's why many of the problems that we experience really results on the level of the conceptual thought processes, whereas the perceptual processes are much more automatic.
Jimpa, I have one other question, if I might, and perhaps His Holiness would also like to comment before we go on to Richie. This is regarding the relationship between contemplative practice and study. They seem to be quite distinct in their character and form. Is it always the case that study needs to precede practice, or can you also find a disposition, perhaps a style which is more comfortable, where one begins with practice and then studies as a consequence of that which arises and the interest which arises through practice? Some traditions within the spiritual traditions emphasize more practice, less study. Others more study, less practice. How is it you both see that?
No.
담이 가서 우리 그 쏜던 가르쳐 마시 트부트부 개발 여러 마다시 태성 광송 그 싫었으니. 투주고 싫을 때네 섬주고 싫어. 섬주고 싫을 때는 곤주고 싫어요. 누가 냠냠으로 봤다.
Of course, in the traditions, you do see differences in the way in which certain emphases are made, as you pointed out. But generally speaking, with respect to a specific quality that you are cultivating, in the Buddhist tradition, there is this understanding of the three levels of understanding. So the initial level of understanding is more kind of based upon hearing and listening and studying. So which is
hearing and reading.
Reading. So it's sort of more verbally based level of understanding. Then the next level of understanding is. So here you are really more at the level of beliefs and assumption. So it's basically the knowledge is more of a hearsay, and then at the second level, through critical reflection, then you can arrive to a different level of understanding where the conviction comes in. Mm-hmm. And then this can, through constant... So there is the valid cognition, a true knowledge.
It's based on reason. So reason also is not just a repeat, or someone says that way. No. Analyze. And also here, very important to read different text And also very, very helpful. Read text with different views. Then you have the opportunity to analyze. If this text, same view, then not much basis of dialectical sort of thing. So different views, then you get the opportunity. Now, what's this? What's the main reasons? This text use what main reason? Then you think. Through that way, you get more sort of firm conviction, not only knowledge, but conviction. Then familiarize that.
And then you get to an experiential level of knowledge and understanding. Yeah.
Thank you.
So of course there are different emphases, but sometimes you meet with people who say that what matters is meditation. You don't need to study. So you do find, but generally speaking, the mode of approach is really study that leads to understanding.
Good. Thank you.
So in fact, the Tibetan master gave the analogy of someone who's meditating without much understanding as someone with very difficult fingers trying to climb up rocks.
Right. They have
no grasp.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I guess we don't get away without study, so we all have to brace ourselves for the challenge of complexity. Thank you very much, Sunchen Jipa.
Thank you.
And we have now the final presentation will be by Professor Richard Davidson from the University of Wisconsin, and perhaps America's foremost researcher in contemplative neuroscience. We've been hearing from, could say, the more Buddhist, Japanese, and Tibetan side. Now we will move to a scientific presentation to bring in yet one more challenging and complex voice. Thank you, Richie.
Your Holiness, it's wonderful to be with you in Japan, and your involvement and dialogue with scientists has been inspirational not just for myself but for a whole new generation of scientists. And the Mind and Life Institute, in partnership with you, has been creating this new field of contemplative science and contemplative neuroscience in a way which we all aspire will really impact the world. And we're beginning, I think, to see some early signs of the impact of this kind of work. And some people in the audience may not know, but Your Holiness gave a major address on the campus of the National Institute of Health, probably the most prominent research center for biomedical research in the world. And that was a personal dream for me to see Your Holiness in that context. And I think it's a testament to how influential this work is becoming, and it's getting the serious attention of the world's scientific community. And so I am so deeply grateful for your involvement. It has been so important to help move this work along. What I'd like to do today is just to summarize a few things, and I'll start with a little bit of discussion about why this is such an important period for science, and why this historical period is one that I think is becoming more open to the dialogue that Your Holiness has been promoting. And so there are four specific themes that are present in modern science. The first being a theme we've talked a lot about together, and that's the theme of neuroplasticity, the simple idea that the brain can change in response to experience and in response to our intentional exercising of it. And one of the things that I frequently say is that our brains are changing all the time, wittingly or unwittingly. Most of the time it's unwitting. Most of the time we're not paying a lot of attention to how our brains are being changed. But this dialogue and the whole area of contemplative neuroscience, I think, is providing an invitation that we can all take more responsibilities for our own brains and cultivate healthier qualities of mind and change the brain in a corresponding way. Now, the second theme is epigenetics, which in many ways is the similar is a similar theme to neuroplasticity in the area of genetics. And what epigenetics refers to is the idea that our genes can actually be regulated. And the experiences that we have in our environments, the interactions that we have, can actually influence the extent to which different genes are turned on or turned off, the extent to which genes produce the proteins for which they're designed or produce less of that protein. We know that a mother who is very loving toward its child will actually induce changes in gene expression in the offspring, and those changes in gene expression actually persist not just for the life of that individual, but actually can be passed on. And we were once taught when we went to school that that's Lamarckian and that that's not the way genetics works, but we now know that that dogma is just not true. In fact, these acquired characteristics can actually be passed from one generation to the next, at least for a few generations. We don't know for how long. There's still many questions that need to be answered, but we do know that it does get passed on. So, the third area actually was something that Jimpala mentioned in the context of Vajrayana, and that is the role of the body. We're learning about the ways in which the brain is connected to the body, and this gives us some insight into how the circuits in the brain that are impacted by contemplative traditions and contemplative practices may actually change the body, and how also changing the body can influence the mind and the brain. The postures that we hold can actually feed back to the brain and influence the functioning of the brain. And we're learning a lot about the mechanisms that allow those interactions to occur. And the fourth theme is this idea of innate basic goodness. Your Holiness refers to this in different ways, and we now have research with very, very young infants, which shows us that if young infants are given a choice, they will prefer to view an interaction that is kind and altruistic compared to an interaction that is selfish and aggressive. So it's not to say that selfishness doesn't exist in young infants, it does, but if given a choice, the infant will prefer the cooperative and kind choice rather than the selfish choice. And so this is, I think, so important because it provides the seeds, I think, that can then be nurtured through practice. So let me give a few examples of some of the research that we and others have done. And from a Western scientific perspective, we can think of the targets of contemplative practice being in two major areas. One is on the regulation of attention, and the other is on the regulation of emotion. And one of the reasons why this whole project of mapping the mind and the dialogue that we've been having is so important is that this interaction with the contemplative traditions, I think, has really helped scientists to reconceptualize certain dimensions that we've taken for granted. And I'll just give one example here, and that is in Western psychology and neuroscience, in the area of emotion, we think of emotions primarily along a dimension of positive versus negative. And we've learned in the Buddhist tradition that perhaps a more meaningful dimension may be a dimension of wholesome and unwholesome emotions. Now, certain negative emotions that we would call negative may actually turn out to be wholesome in that they actually can facilitate well-being. And sadness could be an emotion which can be actually very wholesome. This gives us a different framework for looking at the emotions that I think will turn out to be very, very influential. So we have begun to study compassion to help bring the lens of science to the kind of emotional changes that are produced by compassion. And one of the ways we've begun to do this, as we've discussed over the years, is to bring expert practitioners into the laboratory, individuals who've spent years training their mind, who are familiar with the mental state of compassion. And we bring them into the laboratory and we have them do something very simple that experts report that they can easily do, which is simply to alternate between an ordinary state and a state in which they explicitly generate compassion. Just turning it on and turning it off, so to speak, just alternating back and forth for relatively short periods of time, just a few minutes each. And we look to see how the brain actually is functioning during these periods. And it turns out, in one of the first observations that we made, the brain shows huge differences. And this is just a figure from an early study that Antoine Lutz was the first author of, and this was done in our laboratory. And you've met Antoine, who was Francisco's last student and received his PhD with Francisco. What we observed here is a change in the electrical activity of the brain. And if you look at the early period in the beginning here, this is the neutral state, and then where the lines get much thicker is the period where the practitioner is meditating. And these reflect the presence of gamma oscillations. These are very fast oscillations in the brain that in ordinary people, we observe these oscillations, but we don't observe them for this duration of time. This is very unusual, and in some very recent research that we've just published, we've found that in long-term practitioners, we actually see these oscillations during deep sleep. First time that's ever been seen. We don't know what the significance is during deep sleep, and we're now doing studies, Your Holiness, where we're waking people up just after we see these gamma oscillations and asking them, what's going through your mind? To see if there's any unique mental activity that somehow corresponds with the presence of these gamma oscillations during deep sleep.
The gamma sorry. Yes.
So the other thing we do is we put people in the MRI scanner, and as we've talked about on many occasions, Mathieu Laz is our famous guinea pig. Wonderful. He's willing to try almost anything. And when we put Mathieu in the scanner and others like him, when they're generating compassion, one finding of many that have now been reported is that this area of the brain that's circled, which is called the insula, becomes very activated. And what is the significance of this? Well, this is an area of the brain that is intimately connected with the body. And one of the things that we've learned is that when practitioners generate compassion, it's not just something that's changing the brain, but it's also impacting the body. and we see changes in the heart, and we see changes in other bodily systems as well. And it is through the insula that we think some of these connections may be occurring. That is, the connections between the organs in the body and the rest of the brain. And in very recent, a paper that just came out a few days ago did an analysis of all of the brain imaging studies that have looked at the structural differences in the brain with meditation. And one of the areas that has been found to systematically actually get larger with practice, particularly of compassion-related practices, is this area of the brain, the insula. The gray matter, the actual density of cell bodies, neurons in this area, seem to increase in practitioners who have spent years training their mind in this way. And so this suggests that these changes are not just changes in the functioning of the brain, but they're actually changes in structure that we can measure.
So here, I want to request our Japanese Zen masters or practitioner. This is some, I think, solid sort of that way. Meditation. There are. I met some Korean, although not yet sort of because of the experiment.
Studied long.
Oh. But I think in India also, I'm trying to invite some people who spend years in remote hermit life and then gain some sort of experience. Now, for example, obviously, some sort of sadhus, and this is not only Buddhist, but no matter, there are some Hindus, years spent in mountain area, completely naked. So there must be, we call inner heat. So they must have the experience. So such people, usually you see, frankly speaking, those people who claim, something very holy, something extraordinary experience, then reality, I think, very rare. Nothing here. Those who really have some experience, they really remain like wounded animal. So unless we reach out, then invite with certain. This is not just out of sort of curiosity, but really, now time come. Those people who have some deeper experience now must come out and
studied, yeah. Be studied, yeah. Be studied,
that's I think. So, please keep in your mind. So, our Japanese the religious, spiritual the leaders, please, keep in your mind, and then try to contact. And when you find some really
serious
practitioner, then in the future, or even I think within Japan, some scientist, some brain specialist, can
some research.
Some research. I think now important.
So the next area I'd like to briefly mention is attention. And William James, who was America's first great psychologist, and he worked at the end of the 1800s. And in 1890, he published a very famous 2-volume book, The Principles of Psychology. And he has a whole chapter in that 2-volume tome devoted to attention. And I'd like to just briefly read part of this quote. He said, "The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will." And then he later said, "An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it is easier to define this ideal than to give practical directions for bringing it about. And I think
그래, 줘봐.
나래 대 가다 세미바치리아
네.
네 네트워크야.
그래.
디 가다 지금 로종 자해라 제도쇼 스트레스 디네 칸에 시에데비오 무신 라렌 다가도 갖고 요레스 답돼야 돼.
I think if William James had contact with the Buddhist contemplative tradition, he would have seen that these are methods in that tradition for educating attention. And I think that he would have been very thrilled to find those methods because he searched for them in his life. Wasn't able to find it, but we can use his insights now and begin to investigate how attention can actually be educated. And we'll just give one example here. One way that scientists study this is to study children who have difficulty paying attention, children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In America, approximately 15% of boys between the ages of 7 and 15 are diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. 15%. Many of them, a vast majority of them, are put on drugs, medication, stimulant medication that some people believe can be helpful in their regulating attention. We think that, but there are a lot of side effects to those kinds of medications.
Are these cases by birth or is it due to environmental disease?
It's a wonderful question. There's some evidence that suggests genetic influences, but also environmental influences. Both. Both are important.
So what about if there's a genetic basis for this? So does that suggest that the parents also suffer the same
Yes,
condition?
and if you it's a great question. If you look at the parents of children who are diagnosed with attention deficit disorders, a much higher percentage of the parents have those disorders compared to the general population. But that way, both culture and genetics are playing a role.
I just joke. You see, when we think about next life, then we have to very carefully choose our parents.
So one of the things that's characteristic of these children with attention problems is if you present a stimulus like a light and ask them to press a button every time you see the light flash, their reaction time is very variable. They don't press it consistently each time, and the reason is that their mind is wandering. So sometimes they pay attention, but other times their minds are somewhere else. They get lost in thought. One of the things that we and others have investigated is whether a simple practice of mindfulness meditation over the course of 3 months can change that and actually lead to more stable attention. And in it,
then 저렇게 되면도 부 직배도 잠시라 배때 가서 용댕해지기 스스로 흘려여 있는 디 스스로 흘려여 되는 데다 야또 가서 그래 남자로 샤 진행해지기 디 잡아 되면도 돼.
His Holiness is wondering whether this ADHD condition has any correlation to children whose tendency has personality of being anxious versus someone who's more secure as a result of parental affection and love.
Yes, there's definitely, as we say, comorbidity. So there's children who have attention problems also have anxiety problems. They tend to go together.
So that thing, that mental sort of
agitation
also related with some kind of fear. Distrust.
Fear, no.
Yes.
The fear.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So these, I'll actually skip this in the interest of time, but what we've seen is that
행아지 삼고데 ben 온봉가스 루즈네 대바 듬바 참바 띵지 싫었어도와 다 대바 강다 타야 대바로 다 대바 실내 유전에 배지 진압 되는 용도다 그렇죠 저 대외 장이 이문기니 에는 듬벌리 다디 참발이야 슈기 되게 싫어데 다 심지지 못 된 저거는 매나 sometimes
His Holiness is wondering because in the Buddhist tradition there is a reference to what are known as the 5 faculties. Yeah, in the 37 aspects to the path to enlightenment, there is a list of 5 faculties that are understood to be important for development, and there is a kind of a connection between the 5. One is often translated as faith, but it's more of a confidence and trust, which then leads to kind of an appreciation and interest and aspiration and interest, which then leads to a greater ability to remain focused. So he was wondering whether that has any connection with attachment.
I think it does, and that's a really interesting comment because these children, I think, lack a certain kind of confidence because of anxiety. And so I think they do go together. So what we find is that this is an experiment that also Antoine Lutz was the leader of. And what we find in this experiment is that 3 months of simple mindfulness meditation practice reduces this variability. It allows attention to be more stable. And then there are corresponding changes in the brain. And so this is one of several studies that actually shows that William James was correct in saying that we actually can educate attention. We can nurture this quality and make a powerful difference so that the mind wanders less and is able to remain focused. And all forms of learning depend upon attention. So if a child is not paying attention, then it has effects on all other subjects. So we've also asked, I'm frequently asked whether we've done all these studies with long-term practitioners, if we just take a person who's never done any kind of contemplative practice and do something with them for just a short amount of time, does that make a difference? And we've recently published a paper showing that just 2 weeks of compassion training is enough to change the brain and to change behavior in a meaningful way. It actually enables people to behave more altruistically, and the brain it systematically changes in a way that we can measure. So there's dramatic changes after just 2 weeks of training where people are practicing just 30 minutes a day. So it's a total of 7 hours of practice. And so we're not under the illusion that these effects will persist unless people continue to practice, but it's a proof of concept that we can actually learn to be more warm-hearted. And we're led to the conclusion that qualities like warm-heartedness and well-being should really best be regarded as skills that can be cultivated through training. So I want to just make a few remarks about peripheral biology, biology below the neck, and just show 2 examples here. This is a study that we did a number of years ago showing that 2 months of mindfulness meditation actually enhances your response to a flu vaccine. It actually...
Now this is, I think, right time. More meditate.
Yeah, so this is a good season to think about this.
Yeah. It's very important. So the red is the meditators, and after just 2 months, they show a boost in their response to the flu vaccine. Now, very recently, we just published a paper where we took long-term practitioners and brought them into our laboratory and took a blood sample in the morning, and then they meditated for the whole day, then we took a blood sample in the evening. And we brought a group of controls into the laboratory, and they had a day of rest, where they rested, they quietly read, same level of activity, they were fed the same diet, and we also took a blood sample from them before and after. And we looked at these blood samples for changes in gene expression. And we were specifically looking at genes that are important for inflammation in the body, because there was other research that suggested that these practices may help to reduce inflammation. And what we found is that a number of genes, and this is the paper that just came out, what we found is that a number of genes, I just show one here, this is a gene, RIPK2, that is directly implicated in inflammation. And what we see is that after just 8 hours of practice, there's actually a measurable decrease in the expression of this gene compared to controls who are resting in the laboratory for the same amount of time. The controls show no change, but the practitioners who spent the day practicing actually show a change in the actual expression of genes. So this is the first time we have seen something like this. It suggests that there's a range of possibility that we've are just beginning to understand and explore. So I want to end just with a couple of comments. We're taking this work from the laboratory to the real world. Your Holiness has been such an inspiration. You're someone who is very practical. We want to see whether this can actually make a difference. And Mind and Life is also engaged in a major initiative, as you know, in this area. And so we used a curriculum that we developed early on. We hope to use the Mind and Life curriculum very soon to investigate how a curriculum that's focused on teaching young children simple methods of kindness and mindfulness might change their behavior. And the bottom line is, and we've done this in the context of serious, rigorous scientific research where we randomize children to different classrooms, and some classrooms get this kindness curriculum, other classrooms get the standard curriculum. And what we find is that after just 8 or 12 weeks of this curriculum, there are changes in the children's behavior. They are able to regulate their behavior better. They have more self-control. And also, they are kinder to other children. They actually share more. They're more generous and less selfish. And then I'm going to just skip these. And this is the last thing that I'll talk about very briefly. Older children are spending a huge amount of time in Western culture with computers and with tablets like iPads. And so we wanted to develop games instead of where people are shooting each other. We wanted to see if we can develop games to cultivate kindness and well-being and equanimity. Can we use games to do that? And this was actually a project that was funded by the Gates Foundation. So this is a photograph from one of the games where we have aliens. And the kids really love this. And the aliens have very realistic facial expressions. And a lot of this, actually, Paul Ekman helped us to develop some of this. The facial expressions are animated very realistically using Paul's system. So they're very human-like facial expressions, and the children have to figure out what the faces mean because they can't speak the aliens' language. And the only way to advance in this game is to correctly perceive the faces and also to be kind to the aliens and to help them to accomplish the tasks that they need to accomplish. So instead of shooting them, you actually are helpful to them. And it turns out that the children actually really enjoy playing this game, and they are benefited. The early data suggest that they actually show more altruistic behavior as a consequence of playing these games. So let me just end now with a few summary points. The brain's function and structure and the regulation of our genes are far more plastic, more flexible than we previously believed. Mind training can alter brain function and structure and also alter the regulation of our genes. And from a Western scientific perspective, the circuits in the brain for emotion and for attention are transformed by contemplative practice. And finally, insights can be gleaned from the laboratory and applied in real-world settings to cultivate healthy qualities of mind in children and in adults. Thank you, Your Holiness.
Wonderful.
Somehow one feels that, Richie, you brought it all together. I mean, it's extraordinary. The kind of precision with which the Abhidharma speaks about mental training, the different mental factors. You've taken a selection from those and brought them into a kind of scientific research modality, which would have been unimaginable even a couple of hundred years ago or even 50 years ago. And not only have you demonstrated the power of these methods to convincingly show the effectiveness of this new skill training method of mind training, but also you've begun to bring this into practical application to benefit everyone around us. And I think, as abstract as sometimes these issues feel, 52 mental factors, do I really need to learn all those 52 mental factors? Isn't this just academics talking back and forth and they're going to be just, interested in their own thing? But this is not the reason we come together. These dialogues are meant to elevate and to produce insights which really have application to the reduction of suffering. That the Buddhist idea that ignorance is the source of suffering, of attachment and aversion, one really sees that science, in the work that you're doing, really has the possibility of collaborating and making whole that which has been fragmented and problematic. So thank you so much for the great work that you're doing. It's always been a privilege to have you as part of Mind and Life and to be working with you.
I couldn't do it without Mind and Life. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.